The Ukrainian Wikipedia is the Ukrainian language edition of the free online encyclopedia, Wikipedia. The first article was written on January 30, 2004. As of November 2022, the Ukrainian Wikipedia has 1,205,606 articles and is the 16th largest Wikipedia edition. As of December 2021, it is the second most visited language Wikipedia in Ukraine, with 77 million page views behind the Russian Wikipedia, at 121 million page views. Prehistory. Settlement in Ukraine by members of the genus Homo has been documented into distant prehistory. The Neanderthals are associated with the Moldova archaeological sites, which include a mammoth bone dwelling. The earliest documented evidence of modern humans are found in Gravitayan settlements dating to 32,000 BC in the Burankaya cave site of the Crimean Mountains. In the late Neolithic times, the Kyukutani Tripolian culture flourished from about 4,503,000 BC. The Copper Age people of the Kyukutani Tripolian culture resided in the western part, and the Srednistog culture further east, succeeded by the early Bronze Age Yamna culture of the steppes, and by the Catacomb culture in the 3rd millennium BC. History. During the Iron Age, these peoples were followed by the Dacians as well as nomadic peoples like the Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians. The Scythian kingdom existed here from 750 to 250 BC. Along with other ancient Greek colonies founded in the 6th century BC on the northeastern shore of the Black Sea, the colonies of Tyrus, Olbia, and Hermannasa continued as Roman and Byzantine cities until the 6th century AD. In the Scythian campaign of Darius I, Darius' army subjugated several Thracian peoples, and virtually all other regions that touch the European part of the Black Sea, such as parts of nowadays Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, and Russia, before it returned to Asia Minor. In the 3rd century AD, the Goths arrived in the lands of modern Ukraine around 253-75 AD, which they called Oyum, corresponding to the archaeological Chernyakov culture. The Ostrogoths stayed in the area but came under the sway of the Huns from the 370s. North of the Ostrogothic kingdom was the Kievi culture, flourishing from the 2 and 5th centuries, when it was also overrun by the Huns. After they helped defeat the Huns at the Battle of Nedao in 454, the Ostrogoths were allowed by the Romans to settle in Pannonia. Early Slavs. With the power vacuum created with the end of Hunnic and Gothic rule, early Slavs, possibly emerging from the remnants of the Kievi culture, began to expand over much of the territory that is now Ukraine during the 5th century, and beyond to the Balkans from the 6th century. Many theories of the origins early Slavs, although not known for sure, suggest they may have originated near Polzia. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the Antes Union is generally regarded to have been located in the territory of what is now Ukraine. The Antes were the ancestors of Ukrainians, White Croats, Severians, Polans, Drevlians, Dulbs, Ulikians, and Tiverians. Migrations from Ukraine throughout the Balkans established many South Slavic nations. Northern migrations, reaching almost to the Lake Ilmen, led to the emergence of the Ilmen Slavs, Krivuks, and Radomichs, the groups ancestral to the Russians. After an Pannonian Avar raid in 602 and the collapse of the Antes Union, most of these peoples survived as separate tribes until the beginning of the 2nd millennium. Middle Ages. Early Middle Ages. In the 7th century, the territory of modern Ukraine was the core of the state of the Bulgars with its capital city of Phanagoria. At the end of the 7th century, most Bulgar tribes migrated in several directions and the remains of their state were absorbed by the Hazars, a semi-nomadic people from Central Asia. The Hazars founded the Hazar kingdom near the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus. The kingdom included western Kazakhstan and parts of Crimea, eastern Ukraine, southern Russia, and Azerbaijan. The Khazars dominated enough of the Pontic-Caspian steppe such that there was a Pax Khazarica in terms of trade, which allowed long-distance trade to occur in safety, including groups like the Radhanite Jews who traded as far as China to Tabriz, as well as the trade networks that surrounded Volga Bulgaria. This attracted other traders such as the Vikings in the Viking Age who would found Kievan Rus. Kievan Rus. In 882, Kyiv was founded by the Varangian noble Uli, who started the long period of rule of the Rurikid princes. During this time, several Slavic tribes were native to Ukraine, including the Polans, the Drevlians, the Severians, the Uliks, the Tiverians, the White Croats and the Dolbs. Situated on lucrative trade routes, Kyiv among the Polans quickly prospered as the center of the powerful Slavic state of Kievan Rus. In 941 AD, the Prince of Kyiv invaded the Byzantine Empire but was defeated in the Rus-Byzantine War. In the 11th century, Kievan Rus was geographically the largest state in Europe, becoming known in the rest of Europe as Ruthenia, especially for western principalities of Rus after the Mongol invasion. It reached its highest importance during the reigns of Vladimir the Great and Yaroslav the Wise. Kievan Rus was never a fully centralized state, but rather a loose aggregation of principalities ruled by members of the Rurikavich dynasty. Christianity. While Christianity had made headway into the territory of modern Ukraine before the First Ecumenical Council, the Council of Nicaea, and, in western Ukraine during the time of the Empire of Great Moravia, the formal governmental acceptance of Christianity in Rus occurred in 988. The major promoter of the Christianization of Kievan Rus was the Grand Duke Vladimir the Great. His Christian interest was midwifed by his grandmother, Princess Olga. Later, an enduring part of the East Slavic legal tradition was set down by the Kievan ruler, Yaroslav I, who promulgated the Ruskaya Pravda which endured through the Lithuanian period of Rus. In 1322, Pope John XXII established a diocese in Kaffa, which broke apart the Diocese of Khanbalik, the only Catholic presence in all of the Mongol lands. For a few centuries, it would be the main see over an area that stretched from the Balkans to Sarai. Disintegration of Kievan Rus and Mongol invasion. Conflict among the various principalities of Rus, in spite of the efforts of Grand Prince Vladimir Monomakh, led to decline, beginning in the 12th century. In Rus Propria, the Kyiv region, the nascent Rus principalities of Halik and Volhynia extended their rule. In the north, the name of Moscow appeared in the historical record in the Principality of Suzdal, which gave rise to the nation of Russia. In the northwest, the Principality of Polotsk increasingly asserted the autonomy of Belarus. Kyiv was sacked by the Principality of Vladimir in the power struggle between princes and later by Cuman and Mongol raiders in the 12th and 13th centuries, respectively. Subsequently, all principalities of present-day Ukraine acknowledged dependence upon the Mongols. In 1240, the Mongols sacked Kyiv, and many people fled to other countries. Galicia-Volhynia. A successor state to the Kievan Rus on part of the territory of today's Ukraine was the Principality of Galicia-Volhynia. Previously, Vladimir the Great had established the cities of Halik and Volodymyr as regional capitals. The region was inhabited by the Dolb, Tiverian, and White Croat tribes. Initially both Volhynia and Galicia were separate principalities, ruled by descendants of Yaroslav the Wise. During the rule Yaroslav Osmomisl Galicia extended to the Black Sea. Rulers of both principalities were trying to extend the rule over another. It was finally achieved by Roman the Great, who not only united both Galicia and Volhynia, but also extended his rule to Kyiv for a short period of time. His death was followed by a period of turmoil that lasted until his son Daniel regained the throne in 1238. Daniel managed to rebuild his father's state, including Kiev. Daniel paid tribute to the Mongol Khan, who appointed him Baskake, responsible for collecting tribute from the Rus princes. In 1253 he was crowned by a papal delegation king of Rus. Previously, the rulers of Rus were termed Grand Dukes or Princes. Polish and Lithuanian rule. During the 14th century, Poland and Lithuania fought wars against the Mongol invaders, and eventually most of Ukraine passed to the rule of Poland and Lithuania. More particularly, Red Ruthenia, and part of Volhynia and Podolia became part of Poland. King of Poland adopted the title of Lord and heir of Ruthenia. Lithuania took control of Polotsk, Volhynia, Chernihiv, and Kyiv following Battle of Blue Waters, and the rulers of Lithuania then adopted the title of ruler of Rus. Also the Genoese founded some colonies in Crimean coasts until the Ottoman conquest in the 1470s. After the downfall of Kievan Rus and Galicia Volhynia, their political, cultural and religious life continued under Lithuanian control. Ruthenian aristocrats, for example, the Olelkovish, joined the governing class of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania as members of the Grand Duke's Privy Council, senior military leaders, and administrators. Despite Lithuanian being the native language of the ruling class, the main written languages within the Grand Duchy of Lithuania were Latin, Old Church Slavonic, as well as Ruthenian, with East Slavonic Chancery being replaced by Polish in the early modern period. Eventually, Poland took control of the southwestern region. Following the union between Poland and Lithuania, Poles, Germans, Lithuanians, and Jews migrated to the region, forcing Ukrainians out of positions of power they shared with Lithuanians, with more Ukrainians being forced into central Ukraine as a result of Polish migration, Polonization, and other forms of oppression against Ukraine and Ukrainians, all of which started to fully take form. In 1490, due to increased oppression of Ukrainians at the hands of the Polish, a series of successful rebellions was led by Ukrainian Petro Mucha, joined by other Ukrainians, such as early Cossacks and Hutsuls, in addition to Moldavians. Known as Mucha's Rebellion, this series of battles was supported by the Moldavian Prince Stephen the Great, and it is one of the earliest known uprisings of Ukrainians against Polish oppression. These rebellions saw the capture of several cities of Pokutya, and reached as far west as Lviv, but without capturing the latter. The 15th century decline of the Golden Horde enabled the foundation of the Crimean Khanate, which occupied present-day Black Sea shores and southern steppes of Ukraine. Until the late 18th century, the Crimean Khanate maintained a massive slave trade with the Ottoman Empire and the Middle East, exporting about 2 million slaves from Russia and Ukraine over the period 1500–1700. It remained a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire until 1774, when it was finally dissolved by the Russian Empire in 1783. Early Modern Period. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. After the Union of Lublin in 1569 and the formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Ukraine fell under the Polish administration, becoming part of the Crown of the Kingdom of Poland. The period immediately following the creation of the Commonwealth saw a huge revitalization in colonization efforts. Many new cities and villages were founded and links between different Ukrainian regions, such as Halichland and Volhynia, were greatly extended. New schools spread the ideas of the Renaissance. Polish peasants arrived in great numbers and quickly became mixed with the local population. During this time, most Ukrainian nobles became Polonist and converted to Catholicism, and while most Ruthenian-speaking peasants remained within the Eastern Orthodox Church, social tension rose. Some of the Polonized mobility would heavily shape Polish culture, for example, Stanislaw Orzechowski. Ruthenian peasants who fled efforts to force them into serfdom came to be known as Cossacks and earned a reputation for their fierce martial spirit. Some Cossacks were enlisted by the Commonwealth as soldiers to protect the southeastern borders of Commonwealth from Tatars or took part in campaigns abroad. Cossack units were also active in wars between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Tsardom of Russia. Despite the Cossacks' military usefulness, the Commonwealth, dominated by its nobility, refused to grant them any significant autonomy, instead attempting to turn most of the Cossack population into serfs. This led to an increasing number of Cossack rebellions aimed at the Commonwealth. Cossack era. The 1648 Ukrainian Cossack Rebellion or Khmelnytskaya Uprising, which started an era known as the Ruin, undermined the foundations and stability of the Commonwealth. The nascent Cossack state, the Cossack Hetmanate, usually viewed as precursor of Ukraine, found itself in a three-sided military and diplomatic rivalry with the Ottoman Turks, who controlled the Tatars to the south, the Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania, and the Tsardom of Muscovy to the east. The Zaporizhian host, in order to leave the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, sought a treaty of protection with Russia in 1654. This agreement was known as the Treaty of Pereyaslav. Commonwealth authorities then sought compromise with the Ukrainian Cossack state by signing the Treaty of Haidyak in 1658, but after 13 years of incessant warfare the agreement was later superseded by the 1667 Polish-Russian Treaty of Andrusovo, which divided Ukrainian territory between the Commonwealth and Russia. Under Russia, the Cossacks initially retained official autonomy in the Hetmanate. For a time, they also maintained a semi-independent republic in Zaporozhye, and a colony on the Russian frontier in Sloboda, Ukraine. In 1686, the Metropolitanate of Kyiv was annexed by the Moscow Patriarchate through the synodal letter of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople Dionysius IV. Russian Empire and Austria-Hungary. During subsequent decades, Tsarist rule over central Ukraine gradually replaced protection. Sporadic Cossack uprisings were now aimed at the Russian authorities, but eventually petered out by the late 18th century, following the destruction of entire Cossack hosts. After the partitions of Poland in 1772, 1793 and 1795, the extreme west of Ukraine fell under the control of the Austrians, with the rest becoming a part of the Russian Empire. As a result of the Russo-Turkish Wars, the Ottoman Empire's control receded from south-central Ukraine, while the rule of Hungary over the Transcarpathian region continued. Ukrainian writers and intellectuals were inspired by the nationalistic spirit stirring other European peoples existing under other imperial governments and became determined to revive the Ukrainian linguistic and cultural traditions and re-establish a Ukrainian nation-state, a movement that became known as Ukrainophilism. Russia, fearing separatism, imposed strict limits on attempts to elevate the Ukrainian language and culture, even banning its use and study. The Russophile policies of Russification and Panslavism led to an exodus of a number of Ukrainian intellectuals into western Ukraine. However, many Ukrainians accepted their fate in the Russian Empire and some were able to achieve great success there. The fate of the Ukrainians was far different under the Austrian Empire, where they found themselves in the pawn position of the Russian-Austrian power struggle for Central and Southern Europe. Unlike in Russia, most of the elite that ruled Galicia were of Austrian or Polish descent, with the Ruthenians being almost exclusively kept in peasantry. During the 19th century, Russophilia was a common occurrence among the Slavic population, but the mass exodus of Ukrainian intellectuals escaping from Russian repression in eastern Ukraine, as well as the intervention of Austrian authorities, caused the movement to be replaced by Ukrainophilia, which would then cross over into the Russian Empire. With the start of World War I, all those supporting Russia were rounded up by Austrian forces and held in a concentration camp at Taulerhof, where many died. Modern history. 17th and 18th century Ukraine. Ukraine emerges as the concept of a nation, and the Ukrainians as a nationality, with the Ukrainian national revival in the mid-18th century, in the wake of the peasant revolt of 1768–1769 and the eventual partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Galicia fell to the Austrian Empire, and the rest of Ukraine to the Russian Empire. While right bank Ukraine belonged to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth until late 1793, left bank Ukraine had been incorporated into Tsardom of Russia in 1667. In 1672, Podolaya was occupied by the Turkish Ottoman Empire, while Kyiv and Braclav came under the control of Hetman Petro Doroshenko until 1681, when they were also captured by the Turks, but in 1699 the Treaty of Karlowitz returned those lands to the Commonwealth. Most of Ukraine fell to the Russian Empire under the reign of Catherine the Great. In 1793 right bank Ukraine was annexed by Russia in the Second Partition of Poland. Ukrainian writers and intellectuals were inspired by the nationalistic spirit stirring other European peoples existing under other imperial governments. Russia, fearing separatism, imposed strict limits on attempts to elevate the Ukrainian language and culture, even banning its use and study. The Russophile policies of Russification and Panslavism led to an exodus of some Ukrainian intellectuals into Western Ukraine, while others embraced a Pan-Slavic or Russian identity. 19th century. Ukraine under the reign of Alexander I saw Russian presence only involving the imperial army and its bureaucracy, but by the reign of Nicholas I, Russia had by then established a centralized administration in Ukraine. After suppressing the November uprising of 1830, the Tsarist regime instituted Russification policies on the right bank. The 2.4 million Ukrainians under the Habsburg Empire lived in eastern Galicia and consisted mainly of the peasantry, with the remainder being priestly families. The Galician nobility were majoritively Poles or Polonized Ukrainians. Development here lagged behind Russian-ruled Ukraine and was one of the poorest regions in Europe. The rise in national consciousness arose in the 19th century, with representation of the intelligentsia declining among the nobles and increasing towards commoners and peasants. They saw a process of nation-building to improve national rights and social justice, but was uncovered soon after by the Tsarist authorities. After the 1848 revolutions, Ukrainians established the Supreme Ruthenian Council, demanding autonomy. They also opened the first Ukrainian language newspaper. The 1861 emancipation greatly impacted Ukrainians, as 42% of them were serfs. During the late 19th century, heavy taxes, rapid population growth and lack of land impoverished the peasantry. However, the steppe regions managed to produce 20% of world production of wheat and 80% of the empire's sugar. Later, industrialization arrived with the first railway track constructed in 1866. Ukraine's economy by now was integrated into the imperial system and it saw much urban development. 20th century. Russian Revolution and War of Independence. Second World War. Independence. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine became an independent state, formalized with a referendum in December 1991. On January 21, 1990, over 300,000 Ukrainians organized a human chain for Ukrainian independence between Kyiv and Lviv. Ukraine officially declared itself an independent country on August 24, 1991, when the Communist Supreme Soviet of Ukraine proclaimed that Ukraine would no longer follow the laws of USSR and only the laws of the Ukrainian SSR, de facto declaring Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. On December 1, voters approved a referendum formalizing independence from the Soviet Union. Over 90% of Ukrainian citizens voted for independence, with majorities in every region, including 56% in Crimea. The Soviet Union formally ceased to exist on December 26. when the presidents of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia met in Bialowieza Forest to formally dissolve the Union in accordance with the Soviet constitution. With this, Ukraine's independence was formalized de jure and recognized by the international community. Also on December 1, 1991, Ukrainian voters in their first presidential election elected Leonid Kravchuk. During his presidency, the Ukrainian economy shrank by more than 10% per year. The presidency of the second president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, was surrounded by numerous corruption scandals and the lessening of media freedoms, including the cassette scandal. During Kuchma's presidency, the economy recovered, with GDP growth at around 10% a year in his last years in office. Orange Revolution and Euromaidan. Western integration. Russo-Ukrainian War. National historiography. The scholarly study of Ukraine's history emerged from Romantic impulses in the late 19th century when German Romanticism spread to Eastern Europe. The outstanding leaders were Volodymyr Antonovich, based in Kyiv, and his student Mikhailo Hrushevsky. For the first time, full-scale scholarly studies based on archival sources, modern research techniques, and modern historical theories became possible. However, the demands of government officials Tsarist, to a lesser degree Austro-Hungarian and Polish, and later Soviet made it difficult to disseminate ideas that ran counter to the central government. Therefore, exile schools of historians emerged in Central Europe and Canada after 1920. Strikingly different interpretations of the medieval state of Kievan Rus appear in the four schools of historiography within Ukraine: Russophile, Sovietophile, Eastern Slavic, and Ukrainophile. In the Soviet Union, there was a radical break after 1921, led by Mikhail Pokrovsky. Until 1934, history was generally not regarded as chauvinistic, but was rewritten in the style of Marxist historiography. National pasts were rewritten as social and national liberation for non-Russians, and social liberation for Russians, in a process that ended in 1917. Under Stalin, the state and its official historiography were given a distinct Russian character and a certain Russocentrism. Imperial history was rewritten such that non-Russian love caused an emulation and deference to join the Russian people by becoming part of the Russian state, and in return, Russian state interests were driven by altruism and concern for neighboring people. Russophile and Sovietophile schools have become marginalized in independent Ukraine, with the Ukrainophile school being dominant in the early 21st century. The Ukrainophile school promotes an identity that is mutually exclusive of Russia. It has come to dominate the nation's educational system, security forces, and national symbols and monuments, although it has been dismissed as nationalist by Western historians. The East Slavic school, an eclectic compromise between Ukrainophiles and Russophilism, has a weaker ideological and symbolic base, although it is preferred by Ukraine's centrist former elites. Many historians in recent years have sought alternatives to national histories, and Ukrainian history invited approaches that looked beyond a national paradigm. Multi-ethnic history recognizes the numerous peoples in Ukraine. Transnational history portrays Ukraine as a border zone for various empires, and area studies categorizes Ukraine as part of East Central Europe or, less often, as part of Eurasia. Sarai Plaki argues that looking beyond the country's national history has made possible a richer understanding of Ukraine, its people, and the surrounding regions. Since 2015, there has been renewed interest in integrating a territorial civic and linguistic ethnic history of Ukraine. For example, the history of the Crimean Tatars and the more distant history of the Crimea Peninsula is now integrated into Ukrainian school history. This is part of the constitutionally mandated people of Ukraine rather than Ukrainian people. Slowly, the histories of Poles and Jews are also slowly being reintegrated. However, due to the current political climate caused by territorial sovereignty breaches by Russia, the role of Russians as CO host has been greatly minimized, and there are still unresolved difficult issues of the past, for example, the role of Ukrainians during the Holodomor. After 1991, historical memory was a powerful tool in the political mobilization and legitimation of the post-Soviet Ukrainian state, as well as the division of selectively used memory along the lines of the political division of Ukrainian society. Ukraine did not experience the restorationist paradigm typical of some other post-Soviet nations, for example the three Baltic countries Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, although the multifaceted history of independence, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, Soviet-era repressions, mass famine, and World War II collaboration were used to provide a different constitutive frame for developing Ukrainian nationhood. The politics of identity has remained fragmented and tailored to reflect the ideological anxieties and concerns of individual regions of Ukraine. Canadian historiography on Ukraine. In Soviet Ukraine, 20th-century historians were strictly limited in the range of models and topics they could cover, with Moscow insisting on an official Marxist approach. However, émigré Ukrainians in Canada developed an independent scholarship that ignored Marxism, and shared the Western tendencies in historiography. George W. Simpson and Orest Subtolny were leaders promoting Ukrainian studies in Canadian academe. The lack of independence in Ukraine meant that traditional historiographical emphases on diplomacy and politics were handicapped. The flourishing of social history after 1960 opened many new approaches for researchers in Canada. Subtolny used the modernization model. Later historiographical trends were quickly adapted to the Ukrainian evidence, with special focus on Ukrainian nationalism. The new cultural history, post-colonial studies, and the linguistic turn augmenting, if not replacing social history, allowed for multiple angles of approach. By 1991, historians in Canada had freely explored a wide range of approaches regarding the emergence of a national identity. After independence, a high priority in Canada was assisting in the freeing of Ukrainian scholarship from Soviet Marxist orthodoxy, which downplayed Ukrainian nationalism and insisted that true Ukrainians were always trying to reunite with Russia. Independence from Moscow meant freedom from an orthodoxy that was never well suited to Ukrainian developments. Scholars in Ukraine welcomed the national paradigm that Canadian historians had helped develop. Since 1991, the study of Ukrainian nation-building became an increasingly global and collaborative enterprise, with scholars from Ukraine studying and working in Canada, and with conferences on related topics attracting scholars from around the world. See also: Politics of Ukraine, Ruthenia, Kievan Rus, Novorossiya, History of Christianity in Ukraine, History of the Soviet Union, List of Ukrainian rulers. References. Bibliography. Surveys and reference. Encyclopedia of Ukraine 5 vol. From Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, partly online as the Internet Encyclopedia of Ukraine. Ukraine, a concise encyclopedia. Ed. by Volodymyr Kubijovy, University of Toronto Press. 1963, 1188 pp. Byelinsky, Yaroslav II Soviet Republic, the Ukraine after World War II. Doroshenko, Dmitro, History of the Ukraine. Institute Press, 1939, online. Hrushevsky, Mikhailo. A History of Ukraine. Hrushevsky, Mikhailo. History of Ukraine Rus in 9 volumes. Available online in Ukrainian as. Translated into English. Ivan Kachanovsky, Kohut, Zeniny, Nebesio, Baden Y, and Yurkovic, Myroslav. Historical Dictionary of Ukraine. 2nd edition. 968 pp. Kubitschek, Paul. The History of Ukraine Excerpt and Text Search. Liber, George. Total Wars and the Making of Modern Ukraine, 1914–1954. Magoxy, Paul Robert, A History of Ukraine. University of Toronto Press, 1996 ISBN 0-8020-7820-6. Manning, Clarence, The Story of the Ukraine. Georgetown University Press, 1947, online. Plocky, Sarai. The Gates of Europe, A History of Ukraine, Basic Books. ISBN 978-0465050918. Reed, Anna. Borderland, A Journey Through the History of Ukraine. ISBN 0-7538-0160-4. Snyder, Timothy D. The Reconstruction of Nations, Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, Belarus, 1569–1999. Yale UP ISBN 9780300105865. Pages 105–16. Subtelny, Orest. Ukraine, A History. Toronto, University of Toronto Press. ISBN 978-0-8020-8390-6. A Ukrainian translation is available online. Wilson, Andrew. The Ukrainians, Unexpected Nation. Yale University Press, 2nd edition. ISBN 0-300-09309-8. Yekelkik, Surrey. Ukraine, Birth of a Modern Nation. Topical Studies. Kononenko, Konstantin. Ukraine and Russia, A History of the Economic Relations between Ukraine and Russia, 1654–1917. Lukács, George S. Towards an Intellectual History of Ukraine, an Anthology of Ukrainian Thought from 1710 to 1995. Shkandrich, Myroslav. Ukrainian Nationalism, Politics, Ideology and Literature, 1929–1956. 331 pages, studies the ideology and legacy of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, especially by Dmytro Dontsov, Olena Teleha, Leonid Mozenz, Oli Oldhike, Yuri Lipa, Ulas Samhuk, Yuri Klen, and Okia Humena. 1930s, World War II. Applebaum, Anne. Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine, 496 pp. Online review. Boschik, Yuri. Ukraine during World War II, History and its Aftermath. Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. ISBN 0-92086237-3. Berkhoff, Carol C., Harvest of Despair, Life and Death in Ukraine Under Nazi Rule. Harvard U Press, 2004. 448 pp. Brandon, Ray, and Wendy Lower, eds. The Show in Ukraine, History, Testimony, Memorialization. 378 pages online review. Conquest, Robert. The Harvest of Sorrow, Soviet Collectivization and the Terror Famine. Gross, Jan T. Revolution from Abroad, the Soviet Conquest of Poland's Western Ukraine and Western Belorussia. Kudlya, Sarai. Choosing Violence in Irregular Wars, The Case of Anti-Soviet Insurgency in Western Ukraine, East European Politics and Societies 27 No. 1 pp 149–181. Lower, Wendy. Nazi Empire Building and the Holocaust in Ukraine. U of North Carolina Press, 2005. 307 pp. Manning, Clarence, Ukraine Under the Soviets. Bookman Associates, New York, 1953, online. Narvslius, Eleonora. The Bandera Debate, The Contentious Legacy of World War II and Liberalization of Collective Memory in Western Ukraine, Canadian Slavonic Papers 54 No. 3 pp 469-490. Redlich, Shimon. Together and Apart in Brzezinny, Poles, Jews, and Ukrainians, 1919–1945. Indiana U Press, 2002. 202 pp. Zabarko, Boris, ed. Holocaust in the Ukraine, Mitchell Valentine and Co., 2005. 394 pp. Recent History. Aslund, Anders, and Michael McFall. Revolution in Orange, The Origins of Ukraine's Democratic Breakthrough. Blach, L. Ukraine's Independence and its Geostrategic Impact in Eastern Europe. Debat, Journal of Contemporary Central and Eastern Europe. 21, 165. doi 10.1080/0965156x.2013.841797. S2CID 143454991. Paul Dianieri. Politics and Society in Ukraine. ISBN 9780813335384. Demarav, Anatoly IETL. A Hunger Most Cruel, The Human Face of the 1932–1933 Terror Famine in Soviet Ukraine. Excerpt and text search. Askold Krushelniki. An Orange Revolution, A Personal Journey Through Ukrainian History. ISBN 0-436-20623-4. 320 pages. Kutazov, Alexander. Ukraina. Kuzio, Taras. Ukraine, State and Nation Building. ISBN 0-415-17195-4. Lukaj, George S. Literary Politics in the Soviet Ukraine, 1917–1934. ISBN 0-8223-1081-3. Warner, Catherine. Burden of Dreams, History and Identity in Post-Soviet Ukraine. Excerpt and text search. Historiography and Memory. Himka, John Paul. The National and the Social in the Ukrainian Revolution of 1917–1920. The Historiographical Agenda. Archiv for Sozialgeschichte, Vol 34, 95–110. Hrushevsky, Mikhailo. The Traditional Schema of Russian History and the Problem of a Rational Organization of the History of the East Slavs. Articles on Slavistics. 1, 2, 3542, 355–364. Wikidata Q287037559. Kazhanov, Georgy, and Philip Thur, eds Laboratory of Transnational History, Ukraine and Recent Ukrainian Historiography. Krochenko, Baden. Ukrainian Studies in Canada. Nationalities Papers 6.1, 2643. Reed, Anna. Putin's War on History, The Thousand-Year Struggle Over Ukraine. Foreign Affairs 101 No. 1 pp 5463. Excerpt. Velichenko, Stephen, National History as Cultural Process, A Survey of the Interpretations of Ukraine's Past in Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian Historical Writing from the Earliest Times to 1914. Velichenko, Stephen, Shaping Identity in Eastern Europe and Russia, Soviet Russian and Polish Accounts of Ukrainian History, 1914–1991. Verstyuk, Vladislav. Conceptual Issues in Studying the History of the Ukrainian Revolution. Journal of Ukrainian Studies 24.1, 520. Wade, Rex A. The Revolution at 90, Anglo-American Historiography of the Russian Revolution of 1917. Journal of Modern Russian History and Historiography 1.1, 7–42. Yekelkik, Suri. Studying the Blueprint for a Nation, Canadian Historiography of Modern Ukraine. East/West, Journal of Ukrainian Studies 5.1.